I never imagined the people who shared my blood would one day make me feel like a criminal in my own home. It started with a phone call, a loud, desperate voice that carried more demand than care. "Mom," my son Eric said, "we need your signature today. If you don't co-sign, we lose the house. You don't want the kids on the street, do you?" He didn't even ask how I was doing. He never did anymore. By the time I hung up, my tea had gone cold, the steam fading into the same silence that had filled my house since Harold passed 5 years ago. The lake outside shimmered under the late morning sun, but even its light felt cold. I sat there, staring at the papers he'd dropped off earlier that week. A loan agreement, full of tiny letters and sharp words that cut like blades. I didn't understand most of it, but one line stood out. "Liability shall extend to co-signer in case of borrower default." I might not have known much about law, but I'd been married to an accountant for 40 years. I knew what default meant. It meant ruin. Still, I told myself, they're your family. Eric had a good job, didn't he? His wife, Shannon, was always talking about their remodeling plans and vacations. Surely they wouldn't let it go that far. I signed because that's what mothers do. We believe. We trust, and we hope our kindness won't become a weapon against us. 3 months later, the phone rang again, but this time it wasn't Eric. It was the bank. "Mrs. Dawson," the woman said in a polite but distant tone, "we're calling regarding the outstanding balance of $148,000 on the Henderson property loan. As the co-signer, you are responsible." My heart thudded so loudly I barely heard the rest. I gripped the counter, staring out at the garden beyond the kitchen window, where the daffodils Harold and I had planted decades ago were just beginning to bloom. I felt a strange heat rise in my chest, not fear, but anger. That evening, I called Eric. He didn't answer. Shannon picked up instead, her voice sharp and impatient. "He's busy right now, Mom. He's been dealing with the foreclosure papers all day." "We told you we'd handle it." "Foreclosure?" I whispered. "You didn't make the payments?" "Don't start," she snapped. "You knew what you were signing." That was the first time I felt it. The betrayal. Cold, precise. Within weeks, letters started coming. Creditors, bank notices. Even a lawyer's letter, warning of asset seizure. My phone didn't stop ringing, but it wasn't family calling to check on me. It was collectors asking for money I didn't have. By the time I called Eric again, my voice was trembling. "How could you do this to me?" I asked. He sighed. "Mom, don't be dramatic. You've got the house, the pension. They'll take both if I don't pay." He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "You'll figure something out. You always do." He hung up before I could speak. For days, I moved like a ghost through the house. Every photo on the walls became a mockery. The smiling boy with the fishing pole, the family Christmas by the fireplace, the graduation where I'd cried because I thought he'd make me proud. But betrayal has a way of waking something ancient in you, something that remembers you were strong before they made you small. It was that thought that made me call Diane. She'd been my neighbor for 30 years before moving across town, a retired teacher with a mind like a trapdoor. She listened quietly as I explained what had happened. Then she said, "Helen, they're trying to bury you in debt so you'll give up the house. Don't let them." That night I sat by the window with my old lockbox open. Inside were things Harold and I had saved for decades. Birth certificates, our marriage license, a few letters from his army days. But beneath them, folded inside a yellowed envelope, was something I hadn't touched in years. Harold's handwritten amendment to his will. He'd never told anyone but me about it. The lawyer who filed the original version had died, and Harold had insisted the new one was for your eyes only, just in case. It wasn't notarized, but it was signed and dated, giving me full rights to the property and naming a clause that could block the sale or seizure of our home for unpaid debts. I stared at it for a long time, feeling Harold's words like a whisper. Don't let them take what we built. I hid it years ago, buried in a weatherproof tin box beneath the maple tree in our garden. I'd done it for safekeeping, never thinking I'd actually need it. But now, that little secret felt like the only thing standing between me and ruin. The next morning, I called Eric again. This time he answered. "I need to see you," I said. He sighed. "If this is about the debt again, it's about your father," I interrupted. And the house? You should come. When he arrived, he didn't look like my son anymore. His suit was too sharp, his eyes too cold. He brought Shannon, of course. She never let him face anything alone, especially when money was involved. They didn't even sit down before she started talking. "Look, Helen," she said, voice sweet and venomous. "We've been talking to a financial advisor. You can sell this place, pay off the debts, and move into assisted living. Everyone wins." "Everyone?" I asked. "You mean you?" She smiled like I'd complimented her. "You'll be safe, and we won't have this mess hanging over us. Eric's already spoken to a realtor." I turned to my son. "You're selling my home?" "Mom," he said gently, as if I were a child. "You can't live here alone forever. The money would clear everything. You'd have something left. How much?" I asked. He hesitated. Shannon answered. "After the debts, around 20,000, I laughed. It came out sharp, ugly. "You're going to sell the house your father built, steal my name for a loan, and leave me $20,000? That's your idea of family?" Eric's jaw tightened. "Don't twist it. You wouldn't understand how complicated things are right now." "I understand perfectly," I said, standing. "You've traded your father's legacy for pocket change." Shannon rolled her eyes. "You've always been dramatic, Helen. You think everything's some grand betrayal. This is business, business." That word stung worse than the debt. When they finally left, I locked the door and sank into Harold's old chair. The house creaked around me, but for the first time in weeks, my fear was gone. Anger had burned it away. That night, I went out to the garden. The air was cool, the moon high. The maple tree rustled softly in the wind. I walked to its base and pressed my palm to the earth. Somewhere beneath my hand was the tin box that held my husband's last safeguard. "You knew, didn't you?" I whispered. "You knew they'd come for it one day." The next morning, I took the bus downtown to visit Harold's old friend, Mr. Keene, a retired lawyer who still kept a small office above a coffee shop. He remembered me instantly. "Helen Dawson," he said, smiling kindly. "What brings you here after all this time?" "I need to know if a private will can still protect my property," I said, laying Harold's handwritten paper on his desk. He read it carefully, nodding. "It's valid as long as it can be proven authentic and predates the debts. And this might actually hold up, especially with Harold's signature and date." A strange mix of relief and dread swelled inside me. "What do I do?" "Keep it safe," he said. "Don't tell anyone you have it until you're ready. People get desperate when money's involved." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Eric and Shannon, the way they looked at me not like a mother but like an obstacle. 2 days later, I found a notice pinned to my door. Property valuation visit, scheduled for Friday. They hadn't even waited a week. I called Eric immediately. "How dare you send someone to appraise my house?" he sighed. "It's not personal, Mom. We just have to move fast before the bank—" "Before I stop you, you mean?" There was a pause. Then his voice turned cold. "If you try to block this, I'll have to tell them about your assets." "About the life insurance Dad left." "You wouldn't," I whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I hung up and sat there for a long time, the paper shaking in my hand. I thought about all the sacrifices, how Harold and I had skipped vacations, worn old clothes, worked double shifts to pay for Eric's college. And this was the thanks we got. That night, I went out to the garden again. The wind had picked up, and the leaves whispered like secrets. I kneeled at the base of the maple, brushing away soil until my fingers hit metal. I unearthed the tin box, brushed off the dirt, and opened it. The paper was still there, perfectly preserved. Harold's handwriting looked almost alive in the moonlight. I folded the document carefully and slipped it into a plastic sleeve. Then I wrote a letter, just 1 page, addressed to whoever finds this after I'm gone. I wrote about Harold's will, about Eric's betrayal, about how the truth was buried, literally and figuratively, in this garden. When I finished, I sealed it and buried both the letter and the document deeper this time, under fresh soil, placing a small stone marker over the spot. As I stood, I felt the cold wind sting my cheeks, but beneath that chill, there was peace. They thought they had me cornered. They thought they could bury me in debt. They had no idea I'd buried something far more powerful. The next morning, the realtor arrived at my door with a clipboard and polite smile. Behind him, parked at the curb, was Eric's car. I didn't open the door. I just stood at the window and watched as they argued on the porch, wondering why I wouldn't answer. When Eric finally turned to leave, I saw his eyes flicker toward the garden, toward the maple tree, and for just a second, I saw something there that froze me in place, a small patch of freshly turned soil someone had already been digging. By the next morning, I knew someone had been out there in the dark. The patch of turned soil beneath the maple wasn't the kind left by raccoons or a storm. It was careful, deliberate, the kind of digging done by someone who knew where to look. I stood at the kitchen window, gripping the edge of the counter. The kettle hissed behind me, but I didn't move to pour it. I just kept staring at that mound of earth. It looked too clean, too even, like someone had taken the time to cover their tracks. They knew. Or at least they suspected. I went out after sunrise, the damp grass cold under my slippers. The air smelled like rain and soil, and somewhere a mourning dove called, soft and hollow. I kneeled by the tree, pressing my hand to the earth. Whoever had been here hadn't dug deep, thank God. But the dirt was disturbed enough that my heart wouldn't settle. I brushed away the top layer, my fingers trembling. The soil was loose but intact underneath, the little flat stone I'd placed still in its place. I exhaled, shaky but relieved. The box was safe, for now, but someone had tried to find it. I didn't have to wonder long who. Around 10, Eric's SUV rolled into the driveway. He didn't knock this time. He let himself in like the house already belonged to him. Shannon trailed behind, heels clicking against the tile. Her sunglasses stayed on even inside, the mark of someone who thought the world should never touch her. "What are you doing here?" I asked, voice steady but cold. Eric held up a sheet of paper. "We just need your cooperation, Mom. The realtor said you're refusing access to the house for appraisal. That's going to make things difficult." "Good," I said. "Mom," he said, his tone switching from polite to irritated in one breath. "We've been over this. You can't keep this place. You're drowning in debt. It's the logical thing to do." "Logical," I repeated, staring at him. "You use that word like it makes you right." Shannon took off her glasses and looked around, her eyes landing briefly on the garden outside the window. "Honestly, this whole thing is getting ridiculous," she said. "If you just listen to reason." I cut her off. "You mean greed," she smiled faintly. "You can call it what you want, Helen, but you're not thinking clearly. You're holding on to a pile of wood and memories when you could start fresh somewhere." Smaller, that was when I saw it. A tiny smear of mud along the edge of her shoe. Not from the driveway, this was darker, heavier. Garden soil. I felt my chest tighten. "You were in my garden last night," I said quietly. Her face flickered, just for a heartbeat. Then she laughed, that light, false sound that always grated on me. "Don't be absurd," Eric frowned. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer. I just turned away from them, because if I didn't, the rage simmering inside me would have spilled over. "You both need to leave," I said. "Now," Eric sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, this isn't helping anyone. You're being stubborn for no reason. You signed the papers. The debt's in your name. If you cooperate, maybe we can all get out of this with something left." "I already lost everything," I said softly. "You made sure of that." He opened his mouth to argue, but I pointed to the door. "Get out." For a moment, neither moved. Then Shannon shrugged, turning toward Eric. "Fine," she said. "Let her rot in it. But when the bank comes, don't expect us to bail her out." He hesitated, his face torn between guilt and pride, then followed her out. The front door slammed. I stood there in the stillness, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I knew I couldn't keep the secret in the ground much longer. If they came back again, if they dug deeper, it would all be gone. So that afternoon, I dug it up. The soil was damp and cold, and my knees ached by the time I unearthed the tin box. Inside, the letter and Harold's amendment were still dry, sealed tight in their plastic sleeve. I took them inside, cleaned the dirt from the box, and hid both papers under a loose floorboard beneath my bed. When I stood again, I caught my reflection in the mirror, mud on my hands, hair disheveled, eyes blazing. I looked like someone I didn't recognize, someone who wasn't going to lose again. That night, the phone rang. It was Diane. "I read about your son's foreclosure," she said. "Are you holding up?" Barely, I admitted. They're trying to sell my house behind my back. There was a pause. Then maybe it's time you stop playing defense. What do you mean? I mean, fight back. You said you have something. Proof. Use it. Make it public. I can't, I said. Not yet. It would destroy him. Helen, she said gently. He already destroyed you. Her words lingered long after we hung up. The next morning, I found another envelope on my doorstep. This one typed, not handwritten. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a single page. Notice of intent to repossess property. The bank wasn't wasting time. I called the number listed at the bottom. The man on the other end sounded like he'd said the same script 1,000 times before. Mrs. Dawson, the account is severely delinquent. The bank will proceed with foreclosure unless the outstanding balance is paid within 30 days. I laughed, a bitter, broken sound. I'm 78 years old, I said. You think I've got a spare $140,000 lying around? I'm sorry, ma'am, he said. It's out of my hands. When I hung up, I stood in the center of my kitchen, surrounded by the echoes of a life that suddenly didn't belong to me anymore. I thought about Harold, about the nights he'd come in from work smelling of sawdust and coffee, about how he'd promised that this house would always be ours. I couldn't lose it. That evening, as the sun set over the lake, I made a decision. If my family wanted to bury me in debt, then I'd make sure what they dug up instead was the truth. I started with small steps. I went through Harold's old filing cabinets, finding receipts, ledgers, tax documents, anything that could link our assets to the will. I scanned them all on my printer, labeling each file carefully. I wrote a statement. Plain and simple. This property was built by Harold and Helen Dawson, fully paid off in 1998. Any claim of foreclosure or sale by relatives is fraudulent. The amended will grants full ownership to the surviving spouse. Then I printed a dozen copies. I didn't know exactly how I'd use them yet, but I wanted to be ready. 2 nights later, I heard footsteps outside my window. It was close to midnight. The house was dark except for the glow of the lamp by my bed. I sat up, heart thudding, listening. Crunching leaves, a soft thud, then a muffled voice. 2 voices. I crept to the window and peered through the curtain. In the pale moonlight, I saw Eric and Shannon near the garden. He held a flashlight, its beam cutting across the grass. She carried a shovel. I froze. They were digging. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked. I could only watch as they worked quickly, whispering harshly to each other. Shannon pointed, Eric cursed under his breath, and then he stopped. He'd hit something. He knelt, brushing away soil, and for one terrible second, I thought he'd found the tin box. But then he frowned, pulled up a rock, and threw it aside. Nothing, I heard him hiss. You said she buried something. She did, Shannon snapped. I saw her that night. She had a box. Well, it's gone now, he said, throwing down the shovel. This is insane, she glared at him. Do you want to lose everything? Because I'm not spending my life cleaning up your mother's mess. Eric turned away, breathing hard. You know what? You dig. I'm done. He stormed off toward the car. Shannon stayed behind a moment longer, scanning the ground with her flashlight. Then, with a sharp grunt, she threw the shovel aside and followed him. I stood there, shaking. The garden looked torn and raw under the moonlight, like a wound. When the sound of their car faded, I went outside. The night was cold, the smell of fresh earth sharp in the air. I stared down at the hole they'd left, the ground uneven and broken. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I smiled, because while they were busy tearing up the garden, the real secret sat safe beneath my floorboards. The next day, I called Mr. Keene again. They're desperate, I told him. They're trying to find the amendment. He sighed. That means you're running out of time. You can file a declaration of ownership. If we move fast, we can stop the foreclosure before it's finalized. How soon? Tomorrow morning. Bring the document. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, the garden now a scar of churned-up earth. I kept the folded amendment on the table beside me, Harold's signature catching the lamplight. At dawn, I left the house with the document tucked safely inside my purse. The road was quiet, the lake still covered in fog. I walked to the bus stop, my coat buttoned tight against the cold. As I waited, I heard the crunch of tires behind me. A car slowed to a stop, Eric's SUV. He rolled down the window. Mom, get in! I'm not going anywhere with you, I said. Please, he said, softer now. Let's talk. I don't want to fight anymore. I hesitated. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was the faint trace of the boy he used to be that flickered in his voice. I got in. He drove in silence for a few minutes, the road winding along the lakeshore. Finally, he said, I know you've been talking to that lawyer. I said nothing. Mom, he continued, you can't win this. The house is tied up in debt. Even if you show that paper, the bank won't care. You'll lose it all, and you'll drag me down with you. That's not true, I said quietly. He glanced at me, jaw tight. You think I don't know about the amendment? Shannon told me. My breath caught. You went through my things? Where is it? He demanded. If you give it to me, I can negotiate with the bank. Maybe save both of us. Save us? I said bitterly. You mean save yourself? He didn't answer. We reached a red light. For a moment, he just stared ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. You've always made me feel small, he said. Always treating me like I couldn't handle anything without you. Maybe this was the only way to finally take control. I looked at him, my heart breaking and hardening all at once. You didn't take control, I said. You lost your soul. The light turned green. He pressed the gas too hard, the car jerking forward. You're going to ruin us, he muttered. I reached into my purse, fingers brushing the envelope. No, I said. I'm going to save what your father built. That was when he looked down and saw it, the edge of Harold's signature poking out from the envelope. His hand shot out. Give me that. Eric, don't... He grabbed for it, the car swerving as he did. I shouted, reaching for the wheel. The horn blared, tires screeching. He braked hard, the car jerking to a stop on the shoulder. We both sat there, breathing heavily, the air between us charged and silent. He turned toward me, eyes cold now. You don't get it, he said. That paper changes everything. Yes, I said, clutching it to my chest. That's why you'll never have it. I opened the door and stepped out. The wind whipped my hair, carrying the scent of the lake. I started walking toward town, not looking back. Mom! He called. I didn't stop. He shouted again, his voice echoing down the empty road. Then I heard his engine rev die. I turned just in time to see his SUV pull a sharp U-turn and speed away, not toward home, but back the way we'd come, toward the house. My blood ran cold. I ran to the nearest bus stop, caught the first ride back, and by the time I reached my street, my heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd collapse. Smoke curled above the treetops. For a moment, I couldn't process it. Then I saw it. My house, my garden, my life, engulfed in flames. Neighbors stood on their lawns, shouting. The fire truck's siren wailed in the distance. I ran forward, screaming. No! Hands grabbed me, holding me back. Ma'am, you can't go near it! Someone yelled, but I wasn't looking at the fire. I was looking past it, at the black SUV parked at the edge of the yard. The driver's door open, and Eric standing beside it, frozen, watching everything burn. The world moved in flashes of red and gold that night, firelight, sirens, the frantic blur of neighbors shouting my name. But all I could see was the smoke. It poured from my home like a dark confession, curling into the cold air above the lake. The maple tree bent with the wind, its leaves glowing like embers. My garden, the place where Harold's memory slept, was gone in seconds. Someone pulled me backward, a firefighter in heavy gear, shouting over the roar of the flames. Ma'am, you need to stay behind the line. I barely heard him. I was staring at the figure across the yard, Eric. He stood near his SUV, motionless, his face pale in the flickering light. Shannon wasn't with him. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, like the boy who used to run barefoot through that same yard. But that boy was gone. The man in his place had burned everything. They held me at the ambulance until sunrise. The fire chief finally approached. Soot streaked across his jacket. You're lucky you weren't inside, he said. Started in the kitchen. Looks electrical at first glance, but we'll confirm. House is a total loss, I nodded, numb. My hands trembled, the smell of smoke clinging to my hair. What about the foundation? I asked quietly. He hesitated. Mostly intact. Some of the floorboards under the bedroom stayed unburned. The words slipped past me like a prayer. The floorboards, the documents. If the fire hadn't reached that part of the house, Harold's amendment might still be there. When they let me back onto the property hours later, I walked across the blackened remains. Every step crunched on glass and ash. My home looked like a skeleton. The roof had collapsed in on itself. The kitchen was just twisted metal and soot, but in the back hallway, beyond the wreckage, part of the floor still stood. Charred at the edges but solid. I knelt, coughing from the smoke, and pressed on the loose board beneath the window. It lifted with a groan. Inside, the metal tin was there, burned at the corners, but intact. My heart hammered as I pulled it free. I pried the lid open. The plastic sleeve had melted slightly, but the paper inside was only singed at the edges. Harold's signature was still clear. For a moment I felt him there beside me, steady, silent, protective. I slipped the document into my coat pocket and turned toward the yard. Eric was gone. Only the SUV's tire tracks remained, carved deep into the ash-soft earth. By that afternoon, the insurance agent, the police, and the fire investigators had all come and gone. The officer who took my statement, Officer Benton Young, polite, asked if I suspected anyone. I hesitated, then said, "My son was here before it happened." He wrote that down without comment, his eyes briefly flicking toward the remains of the kitchen. "We'll check the cause, ma'am. If it was deliberate, we'll know. Deliberate." The word sat heavy in the air. Diane arrived a few hours later, her car pulling up beside the blackened mailbox. She wrapped me in a hug before I could speak. "Helen, my God." "It's gone," I whispered. "Everything." She pulled back, brushing a streak of ash from my cheek. "Not everything. You're still here. That matters." I reached into my coat pocket and showed her the tin box. "And so is this." Her eyes widened. "You found it?" "Not even fire could take it," I said softly. We went to her car and I handed her the paper. She laid it carefully on the dashboard, smoothing the edges. "You need to get this copied and filed today," she said. "Before anyone else tries to interfere." "I will," I said. "But first I need to see Eric." He wasn't at home when I went to his house that evening, but Shannon was. She opened the door halfway, her face tightening when she saw me. "What do you want?" she asked flatly. "To talk," I said. She crossed her arms. "About the fire? You think we had something to do with it?" "Did you?" Her expression flickered. "You've lost it. The whole town's talking about how careless you were. Leaving candles burning, using those old sockets. I wasn't even home." She hesitated. "Maybe you forgot. You're not exactly young anymore." There it was, the cruelty hiding behind politeness. The little twist of the knife. I stepped closer. "Listen to me, Shannon. I don't care how many lies you tell the bank or your neighbors. I know what you've been after. But the house may be gone, and still, you won't get what you came for." Her lips curved. "Oh, the mysterious something you hid? Eric said you were losing it. Buried treasure in the garden, was it?" "Not treasure," I said. "Truth." That wiped the smile off her face. For a second, I saw something else behind her eyes. Fear. I turned to leave, and she called after me. "You can't prove anything!" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. At the courthouse the next morning, I sat in Mr. Keene's office while he scanned the document. His hands shook slightly as he turned the last page. "Helen, this is enough. With this amendment and the date on it, the property, burned or not, remains under your sole ownership. The debts tied to your son's loan can't legally touch it." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. "So they can't take what's left?" He smiled faintly. "Not if we file this today. And once the investigators finish their report, if they find foul play, that's another matter entirely." Foul play. He didn't say the words out loud, but I knew what he meant. Arson. That night, I stayed at Diane's house. The guest room was small, with floral curtains and the faint smell of lavender. I sat by the window, watching the lake lights shimmer in the distance. Somewhere across the water, the black outline of my home stood against the dark. I thought of Eric, of the boy who used to bring me wildflowers from that same garden, who'd cried when Harold died. And I thought of the man who'd stood watching my house burn, grief and rage braided together in my chest. Then, sometime past midnight, Diane knocked softly and entered with a cup of tea. "You should rest," she said. "I can't," I said. "They'll twist everything. They'll say it was my fault. Let them talk," she said. "Truth has a way of coming back," I nodded, but inside I wasn't thinking about words. I was thinking about proof. The next day, Officer Benton called. "Mrs. Dawson, the fire report came back early. We found traces of accelerant near the kitchen door." My breath caught. "So it wasn't electrical?" "No, ma'am. We're treating it as suspicious. We'd like you to come in for a statement." When I hung up, Diane looked at me. "Accelerant?" I nodded. "They're finally seeing it." We drove to the station together. The interview was calm, almost clinical. Benton asked where I'd been, who I'd seen, whether I'd noticed anything unusual. I told him everything, about Eric's visit, the arguments, the threats. He listened carefully, taking notes. "Do you think your son could have done this intentionally?" I swallowed hard. "I think he was desperate. And desperation can make monsters of people," he nodded. "We'll be in touch." When we left the station, the clouds were low and heavy. Rain began to fall as we walked to the car. Diane stopped suddenly, staring at something across the street, Eric. He was leaning against his SUV outside a bar, cigarette in hand, staring at us. When he saw me notice him, he didn't look away. He smiled, small, crooked, defiant. Then he flicked the cigarette into a puddle and got into his car. "Don't," Diane said, gripping my arm as I took a step forward. But I couldn't stop looking at him, that mocking grin lingering in the fog. He didn't look like someone afraid of being caught. He looked like someone who still believed he'd win. That night, I dreamed of the garden again, the soil turning itself over, the letters rising to the surface like bones. I woke before dawn, the sound of rain tapping against the window. Something inside me had shifted. For weeks, I'd been reacting, surviving, hiding. But now, for the first time, I felt the balance tilt. It was time to make Eric answer. 2 days later, the sky cleared, but the air stayed heavy. The kind of weather that makes everything feel suspended, like the world is waiting for a reckoning. I returned to what was left of the house with Officer Benton and a small crew of investigators. They'd taped off the property with yellow ribbon. The smell of burnt wood still hung in the air, sweet and sick. When I stepped through the gate, the sound of my shoes crunching over ash was the only noise. "Stay near me, ma'am," Benton said. "We're just collecting residual samples today." I nodded and followed him through what had been my kitchen. The walls were streaked black, but one thing caught my eye, a melted metal fragment near the back door. I bent down and pointed. "What's that?" He crouched, using a gloved hand to pick it up. It looked like the base of a gas canister. He glanced at me. "We'll run tests." Behind us, one of the techs called out. "Found a tire track by the back path. Fresh tread. Could be from an SUV." Benton looked at me again. He didn't say anything, but his eyes did. He'd seen Eric's car that day, too. When I got back to Diane's, the silence felt different, less hopeless, more waiting. I sat at her table with the document in front of me, tracing Harold's name with my fingertip. The letters were shaky but strong. I imagined him at that kitchen table years ago, thinking he was protecting me from a world that would never fight fair. He had been right. By late afternoon, the police called again. They wanted Eric to come in for questioning. Benton didn't say suspect, but the word was there between the pauses. I didn't hear from my son all evening. But at 9:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Unknown number." I answered anyway. "Mom." His voice was low, strained. "Don't talk to them." "Eric," I whispered, "what did you do?" Silence. "Then, you'll regret it if you turn me in." I closed my eyes. "You already made sure of that." He hung up. Diane, who had been listening from the doorway, put her hand on my shoulder. "You need to record every call from now on." But I didn't need to. I knew the next time we spoke, it would be face to face. The following morning, I drove with Diane to the courthouse to file Harold's amendment formally. The clerk behind the counter, a young woman with bright pink nails, stamped it without question and handed me a copy marked Official Record. When I stepped back into the hallway holding that stamped document, something inside me finally loosened. For the first time since the nightmare began, the house, burned or not, was truly mine again. "He can't touch it now," Diane said softly. I smiled. "No, but I'm not done with him." That afternoon, I went to see Shannon. She opened the door reluctantly, her hair messy, her eyes shadowed. The moment she saw me holding that folder, her face went pale. "You should tell him to come clean," I said. Before the police find more than tire tracks. She swallowed hard. He didn't mean for it to happen like that. So he did do it. Tears welled in her eyes. He just wanted to scare you into leaving. He thought if the house was gone, the bank would forgive the debt. He didn't think the fire would spread that fast. I took a step closer. He risked my life. He destroyed his father's legacy. And now you're still protecting him? She shook her head. You don't understand. The debt wasn't just his. We owed people, real people, Helen. People who don't forgive. For the first time, fear cracked her voice. And I saw the truth. This wasn't just greed anymore. It was desperation tied to something darker. Who? I asked quietly. She hesitated, then whispered, a man named Marlowe. He runs construction contracts. Eric borrowed money from him to keep the business alive. I frowned. And now? She looked away. Now Marlowe wants it back. When I left her house, the pieces began to rearrange themselves in my mind. Eric's panic, the sudden pressure, the way he'd burned what couldn't be repossessed. Maybe it hadn't just been about me. Maybe he'd lit that match trying to erase a debt of his own. But whatever he owed, I was the one who'd paid for it. That evening, I stood by the lake and watched the sun sink behind the water. The reflection shimmered red and gold, like the fire still burning in my memory. I spoke softly, as if Harold could still hear me. They buried me in debt, I said. But they don't know I'm still standing. A wind passed over the water, rippling the surface. And in that moment I decided, no more hiding. I called Benton again. Officer, I said, if you want proof Eric was here that night, check the camera at the gas station near the north turnoff. He filled a canister there at 10:42 p.m. There was a pause. Then Benton said, you're sure? I was awake. I saw his car headlights from my window when he came back. He exhaled. We'll look into it. The next morning came with news I hadn't expected. Benton called at 8 sharp. Mrs. Dawson, he said. We found footage. Matches your son's vehicle. We're bringing him in. I didn't know whether to cry or pray. When I arrived at the station later that day, they led me to a side room while they questioned him. Through the glass, I saw him sitting there, hands folded, expression blank. He looked older than he had a week ago, the lines around his mouth deep and hard. When Benton walked out, he looked exhausted. He's denying everything, he said. Claims he filled the gas can for yard work. He's lying, I said. Benton nodded. Probably. We'll keep him overnight for now. I turned to leave, but as I did, I saw Eric glance up through the window. Our eyes met. His were dark, unreadable, but there was no remorse there, only something colder. A look that said this wasn't over. That night, Diane poured us both wine. You did what you had to, she said. Now it's up to the law, but I shook my head. No, the law will handle the fire. But there's something else I still have to settle. What? The debts. The ones he made in my name. If he's desperate enough to destroy a house, he's desperate enough to do worse. She frowned. What are you thinking? I'm thinking of the garden, I said. There's something still buried there. Something I left when I was too scared to fight back. Her brows knit. You dug up the document. Not that, I said quietly. Something older. The next morning I went back to the ruins one last time. The yellow tape fluttered in the wind. The maple tree stood half burned but alive. I walked to its base and began to dig again, my hands in the dirt. After a few minutes, I found what I was looking for. An old tin envelope, rusted but still sealed. Inside was Harold's last letter, the one he'd written before his final heart surgery, the one he'd told me to keep for the day you lose faith. I opened it with trembling hands. If you're reading this, it means the world tried to take what's ours. Don't let them. You have more than you think. The account under our joint trust is still in your name. Use it when you need to start again. My breath caught. Harold had hidden a savings account, untouched, unclaimed. It wouldn't make me rich, but it would be enough to free me, to pay what needed paying, and to end this war. The paper smelled faintly of smoke and earth. I pressed it to my chest and whispered, "Thank you." When I looked up, a car had stopped at the curb. A man stepped out, not Eric, older, thick jacket, dark hair gone gray at the edges. He walked toward me slowly, eyes sharp. "Mrs. Dawson?" he said. I stood, brushing soil from my hands. Yes? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Name's Marlowe. I believe your son owes me quite a bit of money. The wind shifted. Somewhere, the last ember in the ashes cracked softly. I straightened my shoulders. Then I guess you've come to the wrong person. He tilted his head. Maybe, but he said you're the reason he's in this mess. Thought we might discuss repayment. Behind him, his black sedan idled, engine low and steady. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid. I met his gaze and said, "You'll get your money." But not from him, he smirked. Oh, and where will it come from? I smiled faintly. From the garden. Marlowe's eyes followed me as I brushed the dirt from my hands. The man had the kind of stillness that filled a space, quiet but dangerous. I'd met men like him before, the ones who didn't shout to be feared. They just looked at you and waited for you to blink first. I didn't. I know who you are, I said. And I know what my son owes you. He smiled, slow and polite. That's good. Makes this simpler. Nothing about this is simple, I said. If you've come here to threaten me, you can save your breath. He laughed softly. Mrs. Dawson, I don't threaten old ladies. I do business. That's what my son said before he lost everything. His eyes flickered, not anger, just interest. Your son's a fool, he said flatly. Borrowed $30,000, promised double in 3 months. Never paid a cent. He said you'd cover him. Said you'd sign anything if it meant keeping him safe. I felt the words cut deep, even though I'd expected them. And you believed him? Marlowe shrugged. I don't believe anyone. I just collect. He pulled a folded paper from his coat, a copy of a loan agreement with Eric's signature and mine, forged neatly beneath it. My stomach turned. That's not mine. I know, he said simply. But the bank doesn't. For a moment, the garden seemed to spin. The man had just confirmed what I already suspected. Eric hadn't only dragged me into debt. He'd faked my name to do it. What do you want from me? I asked quietly. He tucked the paper back into his pocket. Your house may be gone, but you still have something left. That insurance payout, the old savings. I don't care where it comes from, as long as the balance is cleared. 2 weeks, he turned to leave. Marlowe, I said. He paused, glancing back. If you come here again without calling, I'll call the police. He smiled, thin and sharp. You think they scare me? They don't even scare your son. He walked away, boots crunching over the gravel. The car door shut, the engine growled, and then he was gone. I stood there long after the sound faded, the wind tugging at my sleeves. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to find a way to pay off a debt I hadn't made or risk losing whatever pieces of peace I still had. But what Marlowe didn't know was that Harold's hidden trust, that letter I'd found, gave me a way out. Enough to close the debt, enough to end this. But it wasn't money I wanted to protect now. It was truth. That night, I sat with Diane in her kitchen, the letter spread across the table. You can't give that man a dime, she said firmly. He's a criminal, Helen. Call the police. I will, I said. But first I need to make sure he and Eric never hurt anyone again. If I just pay him, this will never stop, she sighed. Then what are you going to do? I looked out the window at the dark water beyond her porch. I'm going to make them expose themselves. The next morning, I went to see Officer Benton again. He looked tired. Too many nights chasing leads that never held. I need your help, I said, setting the letter on his desk. This is my husband's will. And this, I slid a copy of Marlowe's fake loan agreement beside it, is what my son gave him. My signature is forged. He read both documents carefully, his brow furrowing. This could work in your favor, he said. But we'll need proof the forgery came from Eric. Would a confession help? I asked. Benton smiled faintly. It always does. I leaned forward. Then I'll get you one. For 3 days, I didn't see or hear from Eric. But on the 4th, he came to me. He looked worse than before, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, voice shaking from more than lack of sleep. Mom, he said when I opened the door. We need to talk, do we? I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the porch. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Marlowe's out of control. He came after me last night, said he'd come for you next. Good, I said. Let him. He stopped pacing, staring at me. You think this is funny? No, I think it's justice. He groaned, pressing his hands to his face. You don't understand. I was trying to fix things. I just needed a little more time. You set fire to my house, Eric, I said quietly. Time's not your problem anymore. Morality is, his head snapped up. That wasn't me. I crossed my arms. I saw you there. I went back because I saw the smoke. He shouted. I didn't start it. Then who did? He hesitated. Then, Marlowe's men. He said if I didn't get the deed from you, he'd take it himself. I thought if I scared you into leaving, I could... He stopped, realizing what he'd just said. I nodded slowly. So you did mean to scare me. I just wanted to protect us. Protect us, I repeated. By forging my name. By lying to me. By burning down the only thing left of your father. He dropped his gaze. I didn't light that match. Then tell the police that, I said, stepping aside. Come inside. We'll call them right now. He hesitated, glancing down the street as if expecting someone. Then he shook his head. You don't get it, Mom. If I talk, they'll come for both of us. They already have, I said. He looked at me then, eyes wide, and behind him, I saw a black sedan turn onto the street. Marlowe, Eric's face drained of color. Get inside, he hissed. Now. But I didn't move. I stood there on the porch, arms folded, as the car stopped at the curb. 2 men got out, Marlowe and a younger man with a heavy coat and restless hands. Marlowe, I called out, voice steady. Back so soon? He smiled faintly. We had unfinished business. Eric stepped between us. You don't need to involve her, he said quickly. I can fix this. Oh, you've done plenty of fixing, Marlowe said, taking a step closer. But the problem's bigger now. The lady's name's on the papers. That makes her part of it, he turned to me. You have something of value. Let's not pretend otherwise, I met his gaze. You mean the money you think I have? Or the paper you think I lost? His eyes narrowed. What paper? I smiled slightly. The one that makes every deal you've made with my son illegal. He took another step, the gravel crunching under his boots. You're bluffing. Try me, I said. For a long moment, no one moved. The air was heavy with tension, the kind that makes sound itself feel dangerous. Then Marlowe chuckled. You've got spine, I'll give you that. Fine, 2 days. Get me the money, or I'll take it another way. He turned and got back into the car. The younger man followed. Eric exhaled shakily, collapsing against the porch railing. He's serious, Mom. He'll do it. I looked at him. Then you better start thinking about which side you're standing on. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, Harold's will open in front of me, the smell of burnt wood still faint on the paper. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the debt, the fire, and somewhere between the ticking of the clock and the hum of the refrigerator, I stopped shaking. I knew what I had to do. The next day, I went back to Officer Benton with a plan. I told him everything. Marlowe's visit, the threats, the forged papers, the confession Eric had let slip. He listened, eyes narrowing. We can set up a meeting, he said. Get it on record. If Marlowe makes a demand or your son admits to forgery, we'll have both. Make it public, I said. Somewhere they can't hide. You sure? Yes, I said. I want everyone to see what kind of man my son became. Benton nodded slowly. We'll set it up at the courthouse. Quietly. I'll handle the rest. I looked out the window at the lake, calm and silver under the morning light. Good, I said softly. It's time everyone knew the truth. The courthouse smelled of old wood and polish, like every broken promise ever made inside its walls still lingered there. I stood in the hallway outside courtroom B, the file pressed tight in my hands. Harold's will, Marlowe's forged contract, and a copy of Eric's fraudulent loan. Officer Benton stood beside me, his jacket creased from the drive, his face unreadable. Just stay calm, he said quietly. We'll bring them in separately. Don't say more than you need to. I nodded, though calm was the last thing I felt. My pulse was drumming through my temples, my palms slick. I kept thinking of Harold, how he'd sat on this very bench years ago when we signed the house deed. How proud he'd been, how simple life had seemed then. The door opened and Benton nodded. We're ready. Inside, the small hearing room buzzed with the hum of fluorescent lights. A table sat in the middle, flanked by 2 chairs on each side. The recorder blinked red. Across from me, the empty chair waited, the one they'd reserved for Eric. When he entered, I barely recognized him. He looked exhausted, his tie crooked, his eyes hollow. He avoided my gaze and took the seat opposite me. Marlowe wasn't far behind, his presence cold and heavy as he sat beside Eric's attorney. Benton cleared his throat. We're here to discuss the alleged financial agreements between Mrs. Dawson and her son, Eric Dawson, as well as a third-party lender operating under the name Marlowe and Associates. He gestured to me. Mrs. Dawson, please confirm your statement. I placed the file on the table, opened it slowly, and spoke as clearly as I could. My husband, Harold Dawson, and I owned our property outright. We paid every debt. The documents you see here, I tapped the folder, prove that. My son forged my signature on a loan agreement I never saw, and this man, I looked directly at Marlowe, used it to extort me. Marlowe's expression didn't change. He leaned back, arms crossed, amused. Eric shifted in his seat. Mom, stop! Don't, I said. You've had your say for years. It's my turn now. Benton glanced toward the recorder, signaling the officer behind it to note the timestamp. Eric's lawyer leaned forward. Mrs. Dawson, do you have proof your signature was forged? I slid a printed document across the table, a handwriting analysis from the police report. Your client's writing matches the signature, I said. And this, I pulled the next page, is a copy of his email to the bank, where he claimed to have my consent. Forged, too. The lawyer went pale. Eric looked up sharply, eyes wide. You went through my emails? I went through everything, I said. Because you left me no choice. Marlowe leaned forward. You two can argue all you like. I just want my money. Benton turned to him. Mr. Marlowe, we've also found irregularities in your documentation. The address on your business license doesn't exist. We ran it. Marlowe's smile faded for the first time. I'm not the one on trial here. No, Benton said evenly. But you're about to be. 2 more officers stepped through the back door, detectives I hadn't seen before. They approached Marlowe quietly. You're under investigation for fraudulent lending practices, one of them said, producing a warrant. You'll need to come with us. Marlowe stood slowly, his face unreadable. He looked down at me. You think this ends it? You've just made enemies you can't afford. Then I'll see you in hell, I said. The officers took him by the arm and led him out. The door closed behind them, the sound echoing through the room like the snap of a chain. For the first time in months, the air felt lighter. Benton turned to Eric. Your turn. Eric stared at the table. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost childlike. I didn't want it to go this far, he said. I thought I could fix it. By burning your mother's house? Benton asked. Eric's head jerked up. That wasn't me. I swear it wasn't. Benton held up a folder. Security footage from the gas station says otherwise. You filled a container minutes before the fire started. Eric's face crumpled. It was for the lawnmower. Stop, I said quietly. He looked at me, eyes wet. Mom, please, do you remember what your father said when he gave you that fishing rod? I asked. He told you, never lie near water. It reflects too much truth. You laughed then. But you never learned what he meant. Tears welled in his eyes. I'm sorry. No, I said, my voice shaking. You're only sorry you got caught? The room fell silent. Only the soft hum of the recorder filled the air. Finally, Benton spoke. Mr. Dawson, we're charging you with arson, fraud, and forgery. You have the right to... Eric pushed back from the table suddenly. You can't do this, he shouted. She's lying. She's the reason everything went wrong. Two officers stepped in, grabbing his arms as he struggled. Get your hands off me, he yelled, his voice cracking into something wild, unrecognizable. His eyes met mine one last time, not pleading now, but furious, betrayed. You destroyed this family, he spat. I stood slowly. No, Eric, you did. They let him out, his voice echoing down the hallway until it disappeared into the clatter of doors. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The courtroom felt too big, too quiet. Benton turned off the recorder and came to my side. It's over, he said softly. But it didn't feel over. It felt empty, the kind of silence that follows an explosion. I gathered my papers, hands trembling, and walked out into the sunlight. The courthouse steps gleamed with rainwater. The air was cool, bright, alive. Reporters were already gathering near the bottom of the stairs, murmuring questions, cameras flashing. I ignored them and kept walking. Diane was waiting by her car across the street. She ran to meet me, eyes wide. "You did it," she said. I nodded slowly. "I don't know if I did," I said. "But it's done." We stood there for a moment, the noise of the street buzzing around us. Then I looked up at the gray clouds breaking apart, letting light spill through. "Harold used to say the garden was where truth grows best," I said softly. Diane smiled faintly. Seems he was right. That night, back at her house, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flames, the courtroom, Eric's face twisting in anger. I went out to the porch and sat with a blanket over my knees, staring at the lake. The water shimmered silver under the moonlight, the wind rustling through the reeds, and then I saw it. Headlights across the water, near the ruins of my home. A single car, engine idling. Someone was there. I stood, heart pounding, watching. The engine cut off. The light went out. Then, slowly, a figure stepped into the moonlight. It wasn't Eric. It was someone taller, broader, a man in a dark jacket, standing exactly where the garden used to be. I stepped back toward the door, but before I could move, the faint sound of digging reached my ears, shovel against soil, again and again. The shovel's rhythm was slow, deliberate, the sound of someone searching for something they were sure was there. From Diane's porch, the moon painted the lake in silver, the air so still I could hear each scrape of metal on soil. I watched, barely breathing, as the figure kept digging near the maple tree, the same place where Harold's tin box once lay. He wasn't hiding his movements. Whoever he wasn't afraid of being seen. I slipped quietly back inside, grabbed Diane's flashlight and her old phone, and dialed Officer Benton. The line rang twice before his groggy voice answered. "It's Helen Dawson. He's back," I whispered. "Who?" "The man from before. Not Eric. Bigger build. He's digging in my garden right now. Stay inside. We'll send a patrol." "I'm not inside," I said. "And I'm not waiting." Before he could argue, I ended the call. Diane stirred from her room, her robe tied hastily. "Helen, what are you doing?" "Finishing it," I said. I stepped out into the cold. The grass was wet with dew, the air smelling faintly of burnt wood and earth. My heart beat hard in my chest as I crossed the yard, the flashlight's beam trembling in my hand. The man straightened when he heard me approach. The moonlight hit his face, Marlowe. His jacket was dusted with soil, his boots sunk deep into the ground. "You don't give up easy, do you?" he said, his voice calm but cutting. "Neither did my husband," I said. He chuckled, leaning on the shovel. "I figured you'd be smart enough to leave town, but then, people always come back for what they bury." I stopped a few feet away, the flashlight aimed low at the ground between us. "You think you're digging up money?" He smirked. "Not money. Leverage. Something worth more than paper. You won't find it." He jabbed the shovel deeper, the metal ringing against something solid. He froze. Slowly, he crouched and brushed the soil aside. A small metal box gleamed under the dirt, the same one I'd dug up weeks ago. I hadn't realized there was another, deeper container below it. Harold's habit of double-sealing important things had always amused me, but right now, it made my skin prickle. Marlowe reached for it. "Looks like I will." "Don't," I said sharply. He looked up, amused. "You think you can stop me?" "I think you should ask yourself why Harold buried 2 boxes. He hesitated, fingers brushing the latch. "What are you talking about?" I took a step closer. The first one held what he wanted the world to see. The second was meant for those who didn't believe in consequences. He scoffed, flipping the latch open. Inside was a sealed plastic pouch, papers, a small black notebook, and a thumb drive. Marlowe frowned, pulling the notebook free. The first page was covered in Harold's handwriting. "To whoever comes digging for what's not theirs, you're already caught." Marlowe's eyes darted up. "What is this?" "Evidence," I said softly. "Harold was an accountant. Those aren't memories. They're ledgers, records of every illegal transaction he handled for clients like you." He stared at me, the blood draining from his face. "You're bluffing," I pointed to the thumb drive. "Try me, every name, every date, every number. You Your shell companies, your offshore accounts, all of it. He dropped the notebook, his jaw tightening. You have no idea what you're doing. Oh, I do, I said. You built your power on people like my son. Harold built his safeguard on people like you. Headlights flashed down the road, a police cruiser turning the corner, lights off but visible in the dark. Marlowe's eyes flicked toward it, panic flickering for the first time. You called them. I warned you, I said. You should have listened. He straightened, taking a slow step toward me. Give me that drive and maybe I'll forget I ever saw you. I held his gaze. You'll have to dig another hole, Marlowe, for yourself this time. The cruiser stopped by the fence. Doors opened. Flashlights cut through the dark. Benton's voice called out, firm and clear, "Police!" Step away from her. Marlowe froze. For a second, his eyes darted to the open box, then to me. Then, like a wild animal, he lunged. He grabbed my wrist, twisting hard. The flashlight clattered to the ground. Pain shot up my arm, but I didn't let go of the drive. He yanked harder, shouting something I couldn't hear over the sound of boots pounding toward us. "Drop it!" Benton yelled. Marlowe spun, pulling me in front of him. "Back off!" he barked. The light from the cruisers flashed across his face, sweat glistening, jaw tight. Benton's voice stayed calm. "Let her go. You've got nowhere to run." Marlowe's grip tightened. I said back, he didn't finish. A beam of light blinded him from the other side. Diane, standing by the porch with a second flashlight, aimed straight at his eyes. He flinched. I felt his grip loosen just enough. I shoved my elbow backward into his ribs and stumbled free. Benton moved fast, his officers grabbing Marlowe before he could react. The shovel hit the ground, clanging against the box. Within seconds, they had him cuffed. The night went still again, except for the sound of his breathing, rough, angry, defeated. Benton walked him toward the cruiser. Marlowe glanced back at me once, eyes burning. "You think this makes you safe?" he hissed. "The world doesn't forget people who play hero." I stepped forward, meeting his stare. "I'm not a hero. I'm a widow who stopped letting men bury her. They shoved him into the car, and the door slammed." Benton turned back, flashlight sweeping across the soil. "You all right?" I nodded, holding up the drive. This is what he wanted. He took it carefully, sliding it into an evidence bag. "You've done more than most people ever could." I looked down at the second tin box, the words on Harold's note still glowing in the flashlight beam. "You're already caught." For the first time, I smiled. "No," I said softly. "Harold did." By morning, the garden was a crime scene again. But this time, I wasn't the one under suspicion. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, and men in uniform combed the soil where Marlowe had been digging. The sun rose pale over the lake, its light cutting through the fog like forgiveness. I stood beside Officer Benton as they lifted the second tin box from the earth, careful hands cradling what Harold had buried to outlast us all. "You weren't exaggerating," Benton said quietly, flipping through the ledger pages. "These are detailed, names, numbers, dates. Some of these go back 20 years. Harold kept everything," I said softly. "He said paper is the only witness that doesn't forget." He nodded, sealing the files in an evidence bag. "You've helped us build a case that'll take down more than one criminal. And you might have just given your son a chance to prove his part wasn't all malice." "His part was weakness," I said. "And weakness can burn a house faster than fire." Benton looked at me for a long moment, then said gently, "He's asking to see you." I hesitated. "Where?" "County jail. Just for a few minutes." The thought turned my stomach, but something in me knew I had to go. The holding room was cold, the air heavy with disinfectant and regret. Eric sat behind a pane of glass, his orange jumpsuit too bright for the gray around him. When he saw me, his eyes filled, not with the fury from before, but something softer, smaller. He picked up the phone. "I did the same. Mom," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I heard about Marlowe. They said you turned him in." "I didn't turn him in," I said. "He buried himself." He nodded slowly, eyes red. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I thought I could handle it. I thought I was saving us." I looked at him through the glass, searching for the boy I'd raised. For the one who used to chase fireflies at the lake's edge, laughing until he tripped over his own feet. But all I saw was the man who'd lost himself to greed. You wanted to save us, I said, but you forgot who we were. Your father worked for everything he had. I loved you enough to give you anything, and you chose to take what wasn't yours. He pressed his hand against the glass. I'm sorry, I didn't move to meet it. You can't apologize your way out of ashes, Eric, but you can start rebuilding from them. Tell the truth. About the loans? About the fire. He swallowed hard. Will you ever forgive me? The question hung there between us, fragile as smoke. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to give him the mercy every mother holds like a reflex. But some truths deserve silence more than comfort. I'll forgive you, I said finally, when you start telling the truth to yourself. He nodded slowly, tears tracing through the soot on his cheeks. I'll try. That's all that's left, I said. When I stood to leave, he called after me. Mom, what was in the garden? I paused at the door. The only thing worth keeping, I said. Your father's honesty. Weeks passed. The investigation spread wider than anyone expected. Names from Harold's ledger turned into indictments, and Marlowe's empire crumbled. Newspapers called it the Dawson Files, though I never gave them permission to use our name. Diane kept every clipping in a folder she labeled Justice. As for Eric, he pled guilty to forgery and obstruction, earning 5 years but cooperating fully. Benton told me his statement helped uncover other cases. He'd finally started telling the truth. The insurance company, once ready to deny everything, ended up approving my claim. The payout wasn't huge, but it was enough to rebuild the lake house's foundation, to plant again where destruction had taken root. By spring, the ruins were cleared. The maple tree had survived, half scorched but sprouting new leaves. I planted daffodils around its base, the same kind Harold had loved. Yellow and wild, Diane helped me carry new boards to the porch, and every evening, we'd sit with tea and watch the sun bleed gold across the lake. You know, she said one evening, most people would have taken the money and left this place. I tried, I said, smiling faintly. But some gardens aren't meant to be abandoned. They're meant to remind you who you were before the world got loud. She nodded, watching the water. And who are you now? I thought about it for a moment. A woman who buried pain and found truth instead. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the prison. No envelope, just folded paper with my name scrawled in uneven handwriting. It was from Eric. Mom, I keep dreaming about the lake, the smell of the garden after rain. I remember when Dad made me bury that time capsule, the one with the photo of all 3 of us. You said we'd dig it up when I had kids of my own. Maybe someday, when I get out, we can find it together. I know I don't deserve it yet, but I'm trying to be the kind of man who does. Eric folded the letter carefully and set it on the windowsill. Outside, the garden was in full bloom, sunlight scattered across the daffodils. The earth looked healed again. I picked up my gardening gloves and stepped outside. The soil was soft beneath my hands, warm from the day's sun. I planted a new sapling beside the maple, its thin stem trembling slightly in the breeze. As I pressed the soil around its roots, I whispered, "Grow strong, little one. Grow honest." The lake shimmered, reflecting the sky, the house, the garden, everything I'd lost, everything I'd found. They'd tried to bury me in debt. But in the end, I buried their lies.